Breaking. Netanyahu just obliterated Keir Starmer in front of the entire world, and what happened next has torn Britain's government apart. The Israeli Prime Minister didn't just criticise Britain's leader, he destroyed him with 8 words that ended decades of diplomatic courtesy forever. And the fallout? 2 cabinet ministers have resigned in the last hour. Labour MPs are plotting in secret WhatsApp groups. And millions of British voters are demanding answers about what their Prime Minister actually did to betray our oldest ally in the Middle East. If you want to understand how this diplomatic nuclear bomb just detonated over Westminster, hit that subscribe button right now, because the next 72 hours will determine whether Starmer survives at all. Here's what sparked the most explosive diplomatic crisis in modern British history. 3 days ago at 9:42 a.m. London time, Keir Starmer took a phone call from Benjamin Netanyahu. The conversation was supposed to be routine Middle East tensions, regional stability, the usual diplomatic pleasantries. But Starmer's words were anything but diplomatic. According to senior Israeli officials who were in the room, the Prime Minister lectured Netanyahu for 11 minutes straight about proportionality, international law, and what he called Israel's moral obligations. His tone was condescending, almost professorial, as if he were teaching a child basic morality. Israeli sources describe Netanyahu's face hardening with each passing minute, his jaw clenching, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. But Netanyahu wasn't having it. The Israeli leader interrupted Starmer mid-sentence with a question that changed everything. "Prime Minister, whose side are you actually on?" The line went silent for 14 seconds. Witnesses counted before Starmer fumbled through a non-answer about British values and regional peace. His voice reportedly cracked. He stammered. He tried to pivot to talking points about international consensus. Netanyahu had heard enough. He ended the call without the customary diplomatic pleasantries. "No, thank you. No, looking forward to our next conversation." Just silence, then a dial tone. Yesterday afternoon at precisely 3:17 p.m. in Jerusalem, Netanyahu held a press conference that will be studied in diplomatic textbooks for generations. Standing before a wall of Israeli and international flags, he delivered the most brutal takedown of a British Prime Minister ever recorded on camera. The British government has chosen to side with those who celebrate terrorism over those who defend civilization, Netanyahu declared, his voice steady but filled with barely contained fury. Prime Minister Starmer lectures Israel about morality while British streets are filled with mobs calling for Jewish blood. He speaks of international law while ignoring the 1,200 murdered, the hundreds kidnapped, the women raped and mutilated by the very terrorists he refuses to condemn without qualification. The Israeli leader's eyes were cold, his delivery surgical. Every word was chosen for maximum impact, every pause calculated for dramatic effect. Britain once stood with us when the world turned away. Churchill understood evil when he saw it. Thatcher understood that democracies must stand together. Today, under this Prime Minister, Britain has become an obstacle to peace and a friend to terror. 8 words then sealed Starmer's fate. "We will remember who stood with evil." The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras flashed like lightning. Within minutes, the clip had 4.3 million views on Twitter. Within an hour, it was breaking news on every continent. CNN ran it as their lead story. Fox News played it on repeat. Even Al Jazeera covered it, unable to ignore the diplomatic earthquake. This wasn't just a disagreement between allies. This was the diplomatic equivalent of a public execution, and Starmer was the corpse bleeding out for the world to see. Meanwhile, British Jews who have lived in fear since October 7th watched Netanyahu's words and wept with relief that someone finally said what they'd been too terrified to speak. Sarah Goldman, a 63-year-old grandmother from North London, hasn't worn her Star of David necklace outside her home in 18 months. "I hide who I am when I walk to the shops." She told us yesterday, her voice shaking with emotion she could barely contain. "My grandchildren ask why they can't wear their school kippahs on the bus anymore. I tell them it's safer that way, but what kind of Britain have we created where Jewish children must hide their identity?" Sarah isn't alone. Synagogue attendance across Britain has dropped 40% because Jewish families are afraid to gather in their own houses of worship. They've been spat on, threatened, chased through streets while police stood watching and did absolutely nothing. Videos circulate online showing Jewish students at British universities being harassed, intimidated, blocked from attending classes. One elderly man was beaten unconscious outside a kosher restaurant in North London. His attackers are still free. And what did Keir Starmer do? He marched with pro-Palestinian protesters who chanted for intifada, the same word that means armed uprising, and has historically resulted in the deaths of thousands of innocent Israelis. He condemned Israel 47 times in speeches but couldn't name a single act of Hamas terrorism without qualifying it with but, or however, or context matters. While British Jews board up their shops and hire private security for their children's schools, spending money they don't have because the government won't protect them, Starmer's government sends lawyers to the International Criminal Court to support arrest warrants against Israeli leaders, the same leaders fighting the terrorists who started this war. The contrast is so sickening, so morally bankrupt, that even lifelong Labour voters are turning away in disgust. Rabbi Jonathan Goldstein of Manchester told reporters, "For the first time in my 40 years in Britain, I'm considering leaving. Not because of the anti-Semites, they've always existed, but because my own government won't defend us." But then something unprecedented happened that nobody saw coming. King Charles broke 70 years of diplomatic protocol with a move so bold it sent shockwaves through Westminster and transformed this crisis into a full constitutional earthquake. At Thursday's reception for Commonwealth leaders, the King spent 23 minutes in private conversation with the Israeli ambassador, longer than any head of state received, longer than protocol permits, longer than his own advisers recommended. Palace photographers captured Charles leaning in, listening intently, nodding with what insiders describe as unusual emotion for a monarch trained since birth to show nothing. His Majesty was deeply moved by the ambassador's account of British support, or rather the lack of it. A senior courtier revealed under condition of anonymity, risking his position to leak information the palace absolutely did not want public. The king then did something that shattered precedent and may have permanently altered the relationship between Crown and government. He authorised a formal statement expressing the royal family's continued friendship with the Jewish community and the State of Israel. The statement used the phrase "our enduring bond" diplomatic language that directly contradicted Starmer's government position and sent constitutional experts into absolute meltdown. One phrase in particular stood out: "The Crown has always stood with those who defend civilization against barbarism. Royal protocol demands neutrality, silence, careful distance from any political controversy whatsoever." Charles just torched all of it, set fire to centuries of precedent and declared his allegiance in the most public way possible. Constitutional scholar Professor David Reynolds called it the most overtly political act by a British monarch since the abdication crisis of 1936. The optics are absolutely devastating for Starmer. When your own king publicly undercuts your foreign policy, when the one institution that must remain above politics chooses to enter the arena against you, you're not just isolated, you're finished. The domino effect hit faster than anyone predicted, cascading through every level of British society with devastating speed. Markets reacted first with brutal efficiency. The pound dropped 1.8% against the dollar within 3 hours of Netanyahu's press conference. British defence contractors saw £2.3 billion wiped from their valuations as investors worried about damaged relationships with Israel's powerful military-industrial complex and the technology partnerships that generate billions for UK firms. FTSE 100 companies with Middle East exposure hemorrhaged value. Then the political fractures began spreading like cracks through ice. Dame Priti Patel, former Home Secretary and senior Conservative, called for emergency debates in Parliament with language so harsh it shocked even hardened political observers. "The Prime Minister has disgraced Britain on the world stage," she thundered from the backbenches. "He's alienated our allies, emboldened our enemies, and endangered British Jews who thought this country would always protect them." On social media, the explosion was even more violent and widespread. #StopStarmer trended globally for 11 hours straight, generating 8.7 million tweets. #StarmerMustGo followed immediately after. A Change.org petition demanding Starmer's resignation hit 780,000 signatures in 36 hours and was climbing by thousands per minute. Street protests erupted in Manchester, Birmingham, and Leeds. Not the usual protesters with their Palestinian flags and anti-Israel chants, but ordinary British families waving Union Jacks and Israeli flags, demanding their government stop betraying the values that made Britain great. Military veterans marched in formation. Holocaust survivors spoke through megaphones. Jewish and Christian communities stood together. And the polls? They told the story that Labour dreaded most. An emergency Ipsos survey showed 68% of British voters believed Starmer's Israel policy was wrong. His approval rating plummeted from 39% to 31% overnight. In crucial swing constituencies that Labour won by margins of 2 to 3%, support collapsed completely. Dudley North, Wolverhampton, Stoke-on-Trent, all showing massive swings away from Labour. Inside number 10, witnesses describe complete chaos and panic like nothing seen since the Brexit battles tore the country apart. Ministers are at war with each other, splitting into pro-Israel and pro-Palestine factions that refuse to even sit in the same meetings or acknowledge each other in hallways. David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, allegedly threw a briefing folder across the conference room after a shouting match with Defence Secretary John Healey that turned so heated security almost intervened. Sources say Lammy screamed that Netanyahu's attack was Healey's fault for privately encouraging Israeli hardliners and undermining the government's official position. Healey fired back that Lammy's virtue signalling to Muslim voters had turned Britain into an international joke and destroyed relationships it took decades to build. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner sat silently through the entire confrontation, taking notes, saying nothing, her expression unreadable. WhatsApp groups with names like Save Labour and Time for Change are buzzing with increasingly desperate messages leaked to journalists by MPs who want Starmer gone. One leaked exchange shows MP Wes Streeting writing, "The PM has lost his mind. We can't survive this. Someone needs to tell him he's finished before he takes us all down with him." Another MP, whose name we're protecting because they fear retaliation, wrote, "Angela's ready. She won't say it publicly, but she's ready. The moment we move, she'll step up." Angela Rayner hasn't defended Starmer in 4 days now. She's been conspicuously absent from media appearances, dodging interviews, staying silent while her boss burns in the court of public opinion. When asked directly about supporting the Prime Minister, her spokesperson said only, "The Deputy Prime Minister is focused on her department. Not a defence, not an endorsement, just silence." The question isn't if they'll move against him, it's when the 48 letters demanding a leadership vote reach the threshold that triggers the process. But here's the layer that could trigger complete governmental collapse and reshape British politics for decades. Leaked documents from the Foreign Office show something absolutely explosive that could end careers and possibly lead to criminal investigations. According to 3 separate whistleblowers who approached conservative media outlets, senior Labour officials held secret meetings with Qatar-based Hamas representatives 4 times since October 7th. The meetings allegedly discussed using British influence to pressure Israel into premature ceasefires that would allow Hamas to regroup, rearm and prepare for the next attack on Israeli civilians. One document apparently shows direct communication between a Labour foreign policy advisor and a Hamas official designated by Britain itself as a terrorist. If these documents are real, and if they show what these sources claim, then Starmer didn't just criticise Israel, he actively coordinated with designated terrorists to undermine Britain's historic ally while British citizens were being held hostage in Gaza tunnels. Think about what that means for British credibility on the world stage, British security relationships with allied intelligence services, British honour that we've maintained through centuries of conflict. If the Prime Minister secretly conspired with the same organisation that raped, murdered and kidnapped innocent civilians, including British citizens, then he's not just wrong on policy, he's potentially engaged in activities that border on treason under British law. The optics of that would be absolutely devastating and career-ending for everyone involved. Foreign Office insiders are reportedly preparing to testify before Parliament if granted whistleblower protection from prosecution. Some are already meeting with lawyers. The scandal could explode within days. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage is moving with predatory precision while Starmer drowns in scandals of his own making. The Reform UK leader held a rally in Birmingham yesterday afternoon that drew 12,000 people, the largest political gathering outside election season in 15 years. Police had to close surrounding streets. Overflow crowds watched on screens outside. Standing beneath a massive Union Jack flanked by Israeli flags, Farage delivered what observers called the speech of his lifetime. While the Prime Minister bows to terrorists, Reform UK stands with civilization. While Labour betrays our allies, we honour our commitments. While Starmer gambles with British Jewish lives for votes in Muslim constituencies, we declare unequivocally, never again means never again. The crowd roared for 4 minutes straight, chanting Farage for PM until their voices went hoarse. Farage's message resonated far beyond his traditional base of Brexit supporters and immigration hardliners. He's winning over Jewish voters who've been Labour supporters for generations, whose grandparents fled the Nazis and believed Labour represented working people and moral clarity. He's attracting defence hawks who see weakness and vacillation in Downing Street. He's even pulling socially conservative Muslims who despise Hamas, reject terrorism, and don't want Britain associated with barbarism that violates Islamic teaching. The polls now show a three-way dead heat that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Conservatives at 29%, Labour at 28%. Reform UK at 26%. For the first time in British political history, Farage isn't a protest vote or a spoiler. He's a legitimate Prime Minister in waiting with momentum behind him. And every hour that Starmer twists in the wind, isolated and desperate, Farage looks more like the strong leader Britain desperately needs in dangerous times. The next 72 hours are absolutely critical for Britain's future and the stability of our democratic institutions. On Monday, Parliament reconvenes for emergency debates on the diplomatic crisis. Backbench Labour MPs are preparing no-confidence motions with language designed for maximum damage. Conservative leaders smell blood and they're circling like sharks, preparing questions designed to destroy Starmer in Prime Minister's questions. 3 more cabinet resignations are rumoured to be imminent. Names are being whispered in Westminster corridors and Whitehall pubs, but nobody will confirm until the letters are delivered simultaneously for maximum impact. The King's unprecedented intervention has emboldened those who believe Starmer crossed constitutional lines that no Prime Minister should cross without consequence. Britain is watching its government tear itself apart in real time, while enemies abroad celebrate our weakness and allies question whether we can be trusted. This crisis will be studied for decades as the moment a British Prime Minister chose ideological purity over national interest and paid the ultimate political price. At its epicentre stands Keir Starmer, looking increasingly isolated, increasingly desperate, increasingly finished as a political force. So here's the question that matters. Did Starmer just commit career suicide by betraying Israel? Or will he somehow survive by doubling down and blaming Netanyahu for the crisis? Did the King just save Britain's honour, or did he overstep royal boundaries in ways that will haunt the monarchy? And could Nigel Farage actually become our next Prime Minister after this explosive disaster? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because we read every single one and we want to know what you think happens next. And if this story shocked you as much as it shocked us, share it with everyone who needs to see what's really happening in Westminster right now. The mainstream media won't tell you about the secret Hamas meetings or the Palace Rebellion or the WhatsApp coup plots, but we will. Subscribe right now because tomorrow we're breaking the story about which 3 cabinet ministers are about to resign and why Angela Rayner has already chosen her shadow cabinet. This constitutional crisis is far from over, it's just getting started.